Hello, everybody. I'm Laura Riley. Welcome to the Chicago Wilderness Alliance Café, Occupational Therapy Supports for Natural Resource Volunteers. We're going to give it a few minutes while folks trickle in, but I'm going to turn it over to Emilian Geczi, the manager of the Early Childhood Programs at the Morton Arboretum.
Hello, everyone. Welcome. Laura, do we want to give folks another minute or so to arrive?
I think so. We've got a few people joining now. So just another minute or two if everyone is patient with this.
We'd love to see in the chat if you are comfortable sharing what organization you're with. I'm always interested seeing how Chicago Wilderness encompasses such a variety of members. All right, Laura, anyone else still in the waiting room?
Two are joining now.
Great. I think we'll give them a second and I think we'll get started.
I'll continue to let folks in as they trickle in.
Thank you very much. Well, hello, everyone. My name is Emilian Geczi, and I manage early childhood programs at the Morton Arboretum in Niles, Illinois. And if you're attending this presentation, you, like us, probably have volunteers of all ages who are essential in the delivery of your mission. And I'm honored to introduce to you our presenter today, Packard, who worked with us on a 360 review of our volunteers' activities, their occupations, with the goal of supporting their health and safety as they engage in what we all of us know can be fairly demanding, physically demanding restoration activities. Carrie is a newly graduated occupational therapist from Midwestern University, and she was familiar with the Arboretum because her own grandmother had volunteered here for many years. But Carrie really impressed us from the moment we met with her commitment to create sustainable and inclusive communities that cater to people of all ages and abilities. She's a great advocate for the needs of older adults and is always looking for ways to empower them to take control of their lives and enable them to lead active and productive and fulfilling lives. And in addition, she's also very committed to protecting the environment. So we felt very fortunate to be able to work with her on this impactful project. Also here with us is my colleague, Spencer Campbell, who was the program coordinator for our collections volunteers when Carrie was here and now manages our plant clinic. Spencer and myself are here really to help answer any questions following Carrie's presentation. But now I'll turn it over to the start of the show and and Carrie, please take it over.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the wonderful introduction. And I want to say good morning, I guess good afternoon now to everyone. And thank you all for taking time out of your day to attend this virtual cafe. Today, I'll be talking about occupational therapy supports for natural resource volunteers. So I would briefly want to go over the agenda of today's discussion. I'm going to start with some brief introductions. I'm going to go over what is occupational therapy and ergonomics and the needs of different volunteers in this setting. I will then be discussing occupational therapy resources to help promote the health and safety of these volunteers and take a look at different principles of body mechanics, different adaptive tools and equipment, and then how this was implemented at the Arboretum. Then we'll end with discussing some different recommendations and the importance of these resources for our volunteers. So as Emilian said, I am a newly graduated occupational therapist from Midwestern. During my coursework there, I completed my capstone project at the Morton Arboretum in Niles, and I worked with their natural resource volunteers on the different activities that they were doing on a day-to-day basis. So to start off, I want to go over briefly what is occupational therapy. I know not everyone might be familiar with this profession, so occupational therapy is the therapeutic use of activity to help people of all ages and abilities engage in meaningful and purposeful occupations. Occupations for us include things like activities of daily living, and that can be things like getting dressed, taking a shower, making meals, but it also incorporates things like work, leisure, and then other activities that people do throughout their lives. So we really like to focus on having people do things that they want to do as a way to help them get better at doing it or make it more accessible for them to do it. We can work in a variety of settings like hospitals, rehab centers, clinics, as well as schools and various community settings because we're doing things all over the place. That leads me into our next topic that I want to briefly define as well, which is ergonomics. And I know it's a buzzword that kind of gets thrown around a lot, so I wanted to kind of define how we're going to be talking about it today. Ergonomics is the study of the workplace, and it's concerned with finding ways to keep people safe, comfortable, and productive by designing the tasks and the work spaces that they're in to fit their individual needs and capabilities and limitations. OT fits really well into this because we are trained in activity analysis, and that is essentially breaking down a task into its physical, mental, social, and environmental components, and then looking at ways to modify those components to make it safer and more efficient for people to do, and also decrease the chance for errors, accident, and injury while doing different tasks. So, as I stated, we're going to be looking specifically at volunteers that work in natural resource settings. And these volunteers are a really vital resource for managing healthy landscapes. Currently, the Nature Conservancy lists over 180 sites in Illinois to volunteer in a natural resource setting, which is awesome. And volunteers do a lot in these settings. They help remove invasive species, they burn brush, they monitor species, collect seeds, and they do a lot of different things throughout the year. A lot of these tasks can be really physically demanding and are often done outdoors in various weather conditions. So volunteering is a really important and valued activity for a lot of people, and it has been found through various studies to increase social participation, quality of life, life satisfaction, and it provides many different health benefits to people that volunteer. So it's really evident why a lot of people engage in such an awesome occupation or activity. And as individuals age, it can be more difficult for them to engage in such a valued role. A study by Tang et al. Evaluated why older adults stopped volunteering, and the results highlight that mainly a decline in health is the main component of why older adults are limited in their participation. And currently, volunteers in the United States are between the ages of 41 to 56 and are going to be transitioning into retirement soon, and that opens up a lot of possibility for these individuals to engage in volunteering, and we want to find as many ways to help support them and continue their volunteering into older adulthood and make it so that volunteer programs are equipped to support everybody. So how do we do this? The main thing the first place to start is to examine the needs of adult volunteers. Many adults are managing common health concerns. Some of those can include heart disease, cancer, stroke, diabetes, as well as vision, hearing, and mobility impairments. Also, managing pain can be a large task that a lot of adults are concerned with. Other conditions that adults may be struggling with is musculoskeletal conditions, and these are injuries to the soft tissue in our bodies. This can be a result of repetitive strain, cumulative trauma, and it mainly affects our muscles, nerves, joints, and it can include conditions like carpal tunnel, arthritis, tennis elbow. All of these things would be considered a musculoskeletal condition. And then lastly, as I mentioned on the previous slide, a lot of adults are transitioning to retirement later on, and that is a big life event. Continued engagement in physical and social activities helps maintain mental and physical health. So creating volunteer roles that are accessible to individuals not only is beneficial for natural resource settings, but it's also really beneficial for the individuals that are engaged in those roles. So it's like a win-win for everybody. So some of the ways that we can work to help mitigate some of these risks is by addressing these needs through providing education about safe and proper body mechanics, having a good understanding of how our body moves and what puts our body at risk can help individuals identify actions that put them at higher risks, and then provide them with tips and tricks on how to modify those activities to make it safer, can help them manage and mitigate some of that risk. So from there, I'm going to go through some of the principles of safe body mechanics. And these are things that when I was at the Arboretum, I provided education to the volunteers on these topics through in-services, handouts, and various visual examples. So body mechanics is the mechanical principles that relate to how our body moves. Our bodies move because our muscles use our bones and our ligaments to leverage other parts of our body, and our joints then restrict the direction of that movement. And all in all, we're ended up with different movement for our body. We want to focus on the efficient use to produce motion that is safe, energy conserving, and anatomically and physiologically efficient. So the first component I want to talk about is our posture. Our posture is how our body is positioned in space, and there's different types of posture. Neutral, which is when our body segments are aligned vertically. Static, which is when we are standing still. Dynamic, when we are moving. And then awkward or sustained posture. So in the picture on the right, you can see an example of neutral posture where they are stacked vertically, and then awkward can include things like twisting, lateral bending, and this is when we're starting to introduce a little bit of risk. Obviously, when we're doing tasks, we're not always able to maintain a neutral posture. You got to be able to move into different positions when you're doing different things, but our goal is to maintain neutral as much as possible to help us reduce risk of injury. The next component is joint alignment, and this is a position that our joints are in. And as I said, our joints control the movement of our body, and each joint has a specific range of motion. So on the right here, you're seeing an example of all the range of motion for our shoulder joint. For ease of example on Zoom, I'm going to use my elbow. So our elbow goes from fully extended to fully flexed, and that's its complete range of motion. When our joints are at the extremes of their range of motion, so right now when my elbow is fully flexed, it's at a higher risk of injury than if it was in the middle of the range of motion. Being aware of this helps us understand that's why certain positions put us at a higher risk. So trying to avoid doing extreme forces, for example, if I'm fully extended and then push really hard, I'm putting a lot more strain on my joint than if I was in a flexed position. The next component is the stressors that we put on our body, and stressors can include things like repetitive motion, so continually doing the same motion for a long period of time, extreme force, so pushing, pulling really hard, awkward or sustained posture, so holding the same position for a long period of time, contact stress, this is how we can contract things like pressure ulcers, or if you're continually holding or gripping onto something very tightly, extreme temperatures, extreme hot and cold, vibrations, as well as work schedule and duration are all stressors that we put on our bodies. The more stressors that we're placing on our body at a specific time, the higher the risk is of contracting a musculoskeletal disorder. They're kind of like multipliers. So the more of these that we are doing at a specific time, our risk multiplies by that. Being able to identify these and then have strategies to try to reduce these can help us reduce our risk for injury. So for example, with this person standing here and he's working overhead, if he's able to identify that this is an awkward and sustained posture, and if he's, for example, using loppers and exerting an extreme force, he can then think of potential alternatives to that position. So he could potentially choose a different tool that doesn't force him to have his arms in this sustained posture, or change his body position so he's working more at torso level instead of with his arms over his head. And then lastly, the last principle I want to go over is stability versus mobility. This is an inverse relationship. So the more stable our body position, the less mobile we are, and the more mobile, the less stable. The three components of this is our center of gravity, which is where the center of all of our mass is located. Our base of support, which is where our feet or parts of our body are in contact with a stable surface, and our line of gravity, which is where our center of gravity and base of support interact. When we move, our center of gravity changes, and when we carry something, that also impacts our center of gravity. Being aware of where our center of gravity is in relation to our base of support impacts our stability. So again, with the example of if I'm holding heavy loppers out in front of me, my center of gravity is going to be shifted forward. So to mitigate that, I want to move my base of support underneath my center of gravity and make sure it's in line with the direction of the force that I will be applying, so that I can maintain my stability and reduce my risk for falling. So based off of all these principles of body mechanics, to help reduce individuals' risks, providing tips of things to avoid for high-risk actions like bending, kneeling, reaching, gripping, and lifting can really be beneficial to help reduce injury. So for example, when kneeling, you want to not kneel on both knees whenever possible, and keep one foot on the ground and one knee on the ground. This helps keep your head and torso in line, so it makes it easier to get up from the ground. You're not putting your joints into extreme flexion, and you're reducing your risk for injury. Avoiding twisting while doing any of these positions is key, because you're, again, you're adding more stressors onto your body. Also, incorporating stretches is a great way to help reduce strain. So it can prepare our joints and our muscles for movement. So specific warm-ups and cool downs that target the muscles that you're going to be using are a great way to get your body ready for your workday. Part of my project, I created specific warm-ups and cool downs that target the main muscles and joints that you use during natural resource work. In addition to incorporating those stretches, you want to make sure that you're also incorporating micro breaks. So these are short 2 to 5 minute breaks, at least once an hour. And they provide you an opportunity to check in with your body and see how you're feeling. This allows you to identify any discomfort that you may start to be experiencing, and then allows you to think of ways that you can maybe modify what you're doing to then prevent that from progressing into a bigger injury. It provides a great opportunity to stretch. It improves your circulation, and you want to make sure you're stretching in the opposite direction that you were just working. So if you were bent over, pulling weeds or something, you want to make sure that for your micro break, you're standing and then you're extending your back and stretching it in the opposite direction that it was just in. I know sometimes it can be hard to remember to take micro breaks. Sometimes you get into the thick of it and you don't realize how much time has passed. So incorporating visual or auditory reminders can be really a great way to remind yourself to take the break. So for example, like every time you hear a specific bird or you see a specific plant, use that as a reminder. Oh, I need to take a break. It can also help you improve your productivity and concentration when you're allowing yourself to step away from something for a little bit and then get back into it. The next way that we can help support all individuals is by providing a wide range of tools and equipment for them to use. So the main different tips for selecting tools is that they should be comfortable to hold and fit easily in the palm of your hand. A good way to determine the correct grip size for a tool is if you take your pointer finger and touch it to the knuckle on your thumb. And this is the diameter of the tool handle that you should be using. So typically it's about 1.5 inches to 2 inches in diameter, but that will give you the strongest grip strength and reduce the strain on your hand as much as possible. You want to select tools that utilize mechanical advantages, and this reduces the amount of force. So we're reducing that extreme force, which is one of those stressors. And we want to select tools that maintain neutral joint alignment. So if you think about a shovel, for example, a lot of times you're digging and your wrist is in this flex position. Adding a handle like you see on the right here, which is a T handle, allows you to put your wrist in a neutral position and then get as much force as possible out of that movement. So when you're selecting tools, you want to think, bend the tool, not the wrist. Keep your wrist in a neutral whenever possible. Additionally, you want to select tools that reduce the need for repetitive motion. So sometimes this can be things like selecting power tools or again, using that mechanical advantage. And you want to keep your tools in good working condition so they're sharp, don't have any broken parts to them, so that they're safe and effective when you're using them. And lastly, maintaining a variety of tools is a great option because everybody's body is going to be different. So having a variety of different options for people allows them to find tools that best suit their individual needs. All right, so this leads me now to my work at the Arboretum. The Arboretum has over 1,500 active volunteers, and over 300 of those volunteers work in natural resource settings. The majority of these volunteers are retired, and for my project, I initially conducted interviews, surveys, activity analysis of what volunteers were doing, and collected feedback from them about their experiences at the Arboretum as a volunteer. When asked about what they enjoyed about volunteering, they identified reasons like being outdoors and in nature, getting that exercise and physical activity, learning new things, and building relationships with staff and other volunteers. The main difficulties they identified was bad weather, the changing demands of tasks, infrequent or inadequate time for breaks, and then not knowing how to handle situations that are safety concerns. So based on all the information that I gathered, I determined there was a need for the information related to body mechanics, adaptive tools, and safety tips and tricks. So I created in-services that contained information similar to the information I just shared with everyone. I also created handouts on visual examples and videos for volunteer use. I created the warm-up stretches and cool-down protocols that they could incorporate into work days, and attended different work days to help implement some of the suggestions and work one-on-one with the volunteers. So after all of that, I compiled all of the different resources into a web page, and I can put the link into the chat so that everyone can check it out if they are interested. But let's see. This is the web page. If I go to home here, so it has volunteer resources. It contains the different handouts. So we can go to the stretches one, for example, and it gives you what the exercise is, a brief description of how to do it. And these are for warm-ups and cool downs. Additionally, on the main page of the website, there is a video demonstrating all of the different stretches, additional resources about tips for gardening, joint safety, adaptive tools. On the web page, I also created an adaptive tool guide that goes through all of the different high-risk actions that I identified of gripping, kneeling, bending, and reaching. And it provides suggestions for tools such as foam grips that can be added to different things, universal cuffs for individuals with decreased grip strength, things like this. It gives you an example of why these tools can be beneficial or how they can be used. And then it also provides a link to where you can purchase some of the tools. So that is an awesome resource that people can use to just find things that might make it easier for them to do things in the garden, outdoors, or for whatever they may need. Let me go back for 1 second. So at the end of my project, I evaluated what the most effective methods were for sharing information with the volunteers and the most effective information shared through a survey with volunteers that accessed the information. Based on the results, they identified that in-services, handouts, and visual examples were the most useful type of resource. And the most beneficial information was related to body mechanics and ergonomics. They also enjoyed warm-up and cool-down stretches, and they were able to incorporate these into their workdays. I also asked them to rate on a scale of 1 to 5 how likely they were to incorporate the information learned, and the average rating was around a 4.4. So being around a very likely to extremely likely to incorporate the information into future workdays. So why is this all so important? Implementing these different measures not only supports safe participation of volunteers, but it also enhances the quality of their volunteer work. So by prioritizing physical safety through education, in-services, and various resources about adaptive tools, and providing comprehensive training, volunteers can safely engage in conservation activities confidently. Also, conducting risk assessment to identify and mitigate potential hazards in work areas is very important so that you're able to address any activities, tools, or behaviors that might be putting individuals at a higher risk of injury. And finally, the overall goal with all of this is to create an inclusive environment that really supports the safe participation of everybody, of all abilities, because ultimately that's what's going to contribute to the overall success of restoration. So I want to leave you with some questions to ask yourself about your volunteer programs to see if you are providing supportive services to all your volunteers. The first question you can ask is, are we providing comprehensive training on body mechanics, safe practices to ensure the physical safety of our volunteers? Do we have a system in place to assess and meet the needs of our volunteers, specifically related to adaptive tools and equipment that they may need. Are our training programs effective in equipping volunteers with the necessary knowledge and skills to navigate their natural environment that they're going to be in? Are we regularly conducting risk assessments of volunteer work areas to identify and mitigate potential hazards that might be occurring? And finally, are we actively promoting inclusive participation by creating an environment that supports the safe involvement of volunteers of all abilities? So you can take some time to reflect on these questions and see if there's anywhere that your program could grow or any strengths that your program does currently offer, which is awesome. And then you can also think about if any of the information that I provided in the presentation would be able to fill any of the gaps that you could identify in the volunteer programs that you are involved with. So that is all I have for you today, but I'm open to any questions that you all may have and working towards problem solving. I have my contact information below, so if you all have any follow-up questions later on, I'm more than happy to answer any questions and provide support. So thank you.
Thank you, Carrie. And yes, please. I don't know, Laura, how you typically take questions, if people should put them into the chat or if you just open it up.
I think we have like a small enough group, like people just go ahead and unmute yourself and throw your questions out there. This was really informative, Carrie. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And Carrie, I'll start with a question. I know if you want to just quickly go back to your previous slide, in terms of conducting an assessment of kind of programs and tools and equipment and so on. I know we were very fortunate to have you kind of help us with that assessment and with your training and background. Do you recommend that organizations, if possible, work with an occupational therapist, if at all possible?
Yeah, so like I said in the beginning, we are trained in activity analysis and we have specific job assessment, like standardized assessments that we can go through and utilize on work sites to determine the level of risk of different activities. So if whenever possible, it is great to reach out to an OT that would be trained in this area that can provide that assessment for you. So.
Thank you.
Hi, Carrie. My name's Barbara Sherwood. I work with the Forest Preserve District of Will County directly with natural resource volunteers. So thank you for your presentation. Very helpful. I hadn't quite thought about like adaptive tools and different handles and stuff like that. So I fully intend to try and incorporate those. Do you have any recommendations or resources for those? We have a lot of volunteers in their 70s and their 80s, and they've been volunteering with us for decades, chainsawing and whatnot. And when they're now to the point where they just physically can no longer do those tasks, but things that we can do to help them transition, accept or find new roles so that, you know, we can still utilize their knowledge and they can still be a part, but also not putting themselves at risk at tasks they just can no longer do.
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's such a prominent issue that a lot of people face, that as you get older, it can be a lot more difficult to engage in the things that you used to. One great thing that at the Arboretum I observed a lot of was various different roles within the same activity. So identifying some aspects of tasks, like, for example, when we were doing the invasive removal, it can be difficult for some people to get down on their knees. So instead of being the person with the loppers or the saw down on their knees, they were the flagger, and they would take the flags and go around and mark all of the invasive species so that people could then come and cut them. So this was a task that they were still able to do because it didn't involve getting up and down off the ground. And that way they were still able to be an active member of the volunteer activity. So being able to look at different tasks and see are there ways that we can break this up into multiple different components that allows people of different abilities to complete different aspects of it, but they're all in the end working together to complete the activity.
Okay, thank you.
Carrie, do you mind if I add a few comments to that?
Yeah, for sure.
So, so we have flagging to help identify where the invasives are, but also after they're cut, putting a flag in there so an herbicider doesn't lose the stump and the brush for woody invasives. So it's like another task of utilizing a different tool. But then we also try to find those folks that have already shown their leaders here, if they're doing chainsaw or herbicide, stuff like that, and trying to find a different leadership role for them. So maybe they don't want to operate the chainsaw, or maybe they don't feel comfortable with their skill level where they're currently at, but maybe they can be an herbicider, or maybe they could be the expert about new invasives. So they could be someone who conducts research online to bring new information to the group about things that we as a group can all learn from and be on the lookout for. And then we would often have conversations with volunteers about maybe there's opportunities to follow a new passion. Maybe it's a different aspect of natural resource management. So it could be identifying mushrooms. It could be doing bird counts. It could be, the laundry list is long of different opportunities to be involved in natural resources work that's beyond the physical manual labor, but that are on the edges of the work that we do.
Any other questions for Carrie? Carrie, do you want to put back your contact info in case anyone would like to contact you? And
There you go. Yeah, so then, if anybody is interested in reaching out afterwards, I'm more than happy to help problem solve anything. Feel free to reach out with any questions.
I did have a question for you, Carrie.
Yeah.
I know a question that came up a lot was, how do we navigate in these natural areas that may have uneven ground? So do you have any tips and tricks for folks to navigate that conversation, or maybe to make sure we have sure footing out there in the natural areas?
Yes, that is an awesome question too. On the webpage, there is a handout specifically related to tripping and falling. I know that was a very big concern for people. You're out in the woods, there's a lot of ankle busters and things that you need to keep your eye on for tripping and falling. So being aware of those, first of all, the principles of your stability, so maintaining the wide base of support, your center of gravity, but then also looking at other things that might be factors like your footwear. Are you wearing the proper footwear? Taking your time when you're moving through these spaces so that you're planning a path before you're walking, so that you are assessing the entire area and then moving. So on the webpage, there's a tip sheet with, I think, around 7 or 8 different tips related to safely navigating those environments.
Carrie, I have a question. This is Emily. That website, I was looking at it, has some really great resources. Are we able to share that with our volunteers and things like that, or is it only for this particular group? I just want to make sure that because you put the effort in for specifically Morton Arboretum, that we're not going to have any issues.
The website is free for anyone to use. It's meant to be a resource to help support as many people as possible. So the more people that can get access to it, the better. So.
Thank you.
And I think as far as we're concerned, Carrie did all this great work and it's worth spreading. So if it can apply for your groups, that's excellent. Happy to share.
Thank you.
Yeah, we will also put a link to the resource on our website on our access page, but a PDF of the slides from this presentation will go out to all the registrants as well as be linked on our Café website with the recordings.
That might be, I think, it in terms of questions. Thank you, Laura, for being open to this. As Spencer said, we were so blown away by Carrie's work that we're so happy that Chicago Wilderness was open to sharing this work more broadly. Yes, please access Carrie's resources. Please contact her if you need to. She was wonderful to work with, and you can probably grab a little bit of her time before I'm sure she'll be snatched away by some really high-paying job. So thank you, Laura. Thank you, Spencer. Thank you, Carrie, most of all, and thank you for everyone who attended.
Wonderful. Thanks to everyone for joining us today. Have a great rest of your day and a good weekend ahead.
You too.
Thank you.
Good job, Carrie.
Thank you.